Hey guys, I'm about to get deep with y'all for a minute, and if you've got the time, I'd really like for you to listen and hear what I'm saying. September is SUICIDE Awareness Month. We have to be careful with certain words that we say on social media or you'll get flagged. And I just really have it on my heart to share with y'all the story of my dad. So trigger warning if you don't think you can hear it. Let's first talk about mental illness and how real it is. When a person dies by taking his or her own life, regardless on if you want to accept it or not, they have some type of mental illness causing them to do that. I want to first say that some people who may seem the happiest on the inside may be hurting the worst on the outside, and sometimes there's just no way of knowing. Sometimes the ones who take their lives are the ones who are at the best at hiding that something is wrong. So I wanted to share the story of when my dad did what he did. And I want you to notice in all the photos I'm about to show you, the big, humongous smile that was on his face. That's who he was. That's a smile he always had. So it was a hot Tuesday in June, and I was teaching middle school at that time, so I was out for the summer. At the time, my little girl was 6 months old. My sister had just had a hysterectomy, and she wasn't cleared to drive just yet, so I had taken her to the doctor to her appointment that morning and dropped her off. Well, I dropped her off at the doctor and I needed baby formula, so my little girl and I headed to Walmart to pick up the formula. We picked up the formula, we were checking out, and to this day I still remember exactly where I was when I started getting the feelings that I did about my dad. I had just super weird feelings, this urge to call him. I was passing by Sonic at the time, right by that Walmart, when I kept hearing a voice saying, "Call your dad." Well, let me tell y'all, my dad was a barber. It was 10:50 a.m. in the morning. He wasn't on his lunch break. We didn't call Daddy unless it was an emergency because he had to have his hands up like this cutting hair. I just knew he was at work. Well, I keep driving and I hear it again, that voice telling me to call my dad. I just had this crazy feeling I needed to talk to him and I didn't know why. So I called him and he answered the phone, and normally he was happy and chipper. He'd always say, the first thing he would say is, "How's my best friend doing?" Well, this time he was somber and serious. And I said, "Hey, Dad," and he just kind of cleared his throat, "Hey," like that. No, "How's my best friend?" this time, nothing. He didn't say any of that. I said, "Are you okay, Dad?" And he just said, "Yes," really quickly. I said, "Dad, did I wake you up or something?" Because his voice was just off, and he said, "No." I then said again, "Daddy, what's wrong? You don't sound like yourself." And he then said, "Ask your mama." Well, I'll tell you why he said to ask my mama in just a minute. I said, "Okay, Dad, that's proof right now when you told me to ask Mom that there's something wrong. What is wrong?" I then said, "Is something wrong with Meemaw?" Well, Meemaw was my grandmother, who was actually his mother, and she had been at the hospital at the time and just gotten her gallbladder removed, so I was thinking maybe something was wrong with Meemaw. So I said, "Is Meemaw okay?" And he answered yes. I then said, "Dad, you've got to tell me why you sound like that." And he then said, "I'm about to kill myself." Those were his exact words. Y'all, I can't even tell you what it was like for me in that moment. I was just so shocked and I couldn't process it. I just said, "Daddy, wait, what? No, why?" I said, "No, please don't." And he then hung up the phone. The first thing I did was call him right back, but of course, no answer. So I'm headed back to the doctor at the time to pick my sister up from her doctor's appointment, and I turn on my flashers because I'm like hauling ass, excuse my language. And then I called 911 for them to go check on him. Told them what he said. They then told me that they knew they were on the way. He had called 911, just like Mike and Miller did, to let them know. And that's so they could find the body before. In Dad's case, it was before the family found it. He wanted them to find him before anybody else did. They assured me they were hurrying. 911 did. The very next thing I did was call one of my childhood best friends' dads, because he lived about 3 houses away from my dad, my childhood home. I was lucky enough to have one of my best friends growing up as a neighbor. Well, her dad answers the phone and I said, "Mr. Doug, Daddy just told me he's about to unalive himself. I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's doing. Can you go check on him?" He quickly got off the phone and he flew to my childhood home, which is where my parents still lived. My dad was sitting in the backyard in a chair with a GUN up to his neck. Mr. Doug, my friend's dad, saw him and he yelled out, "Wayne, what are you doing?" Daddy's name was Wayne. That startled my dad, and he then saw Mr. Doug and he said, "Doug, we've been friends for way too long," and something along the lines of he's made his mind up and for him not to be there because he was going to do what he was going to do. He then told Mr. Doug, my friend's dad, that he was just tired. And Mr. Doug said, "Well, Wayne, why? You own your own business, your barber shop. Why don't you just shut it down?" And Daddy said something along the lines of he couldn't do that because he didn't want to let down his customers. So instead, he let down everybody who knew him and loved him and did what he did. About that time, my dad said, "Okay, just let me think about it." And he ran over to the other side of the house next to a fence. Yes, and he took the GUN with him. Mr. Doug then tried to run to the front of the house and kind of meet him on the other side, like where the fence was. Daddy went around the back. Daddy went around the back. Mr. Doug went around the front. He was gonna try to meet him in the middle type thing. My dad then heard the ambulance getting closer, and he ran right back to that chair, and he sat down, and he took his life right then and there. Now, the reason he told me to call my mom that morning is because at around 9:30 a.m. that same morning, he had called my mom, but mom didn't answer. She was actually a retired teacher, and she was training teachers at a workshop at a college close by, but she didn't answer. She was teaching, and so Dad left her a voicemail. I will never forget what he said. He said, "Sandy, it's Wayne. I'm sitting outside with a GUN, and I'm thinking very seriously about ending my life. You need to call Megan or Mandy and get here as quickly as you can." My mom didn't get that message until it was too late. He had an hour and a half from the time he made that phone call at 9:30 a.m. until the time that he took his life. Remember, I called him at around 10:50 a.m. He was preparing his belongings and writing letters and phone numbers down so the cops could have them. But you know what we live with now is wondering, what if that phone call had been answered when he tried to call mom? Could we have talked him out of it? But I don't think it mattered, because he heard his very own daughter, me, screaming on the phone, begging him not to do it, and he still did it. I think their minds are made up at this point. He had little notes written out where it said who would get what of his guitars and microphones and whatnot. He said in that note, in a nutshell, that he was tired and that he loved us all. Now, y'all, that was on a Tuesday. I want to tell y'all that on the Sunday before, so 2 days before that, he was holding my little girl, talking about how he could not wait for her to grow up so he could take her to get ice cream and teach her how to play guitar. My dad was a lead singer of a Christian band. He was so loved. He was very, very well known. Being a small town barber, he knew everyone and everyone knew him. People literally drove from different states just so they could get their hair cut from my dad. He did the old-timey straight razor cuts. He was so loved. He loved everyone. He loved his band. He loved the Lord. He would go around to different churches in the area and sing and play guitar. Guys, my point with all of this is sometimes when someone dies in this manner, we don't have the answers. You don't always have to blame someone else. There's not always a conspiracy theory. There are not always signs in front of your face. And just like with the Micah Miller case, for example, it may not always make sense. You literally never know what someone is going through, and it may be a hidden mental illness that no one feels or is aware about other than the person feeling it inside. Just remember, if someone did this that you know and love, it was their personal choice. Try not to point fingers at others. Just know that they're at peace, and we'll see them again. Mental illness is just as real as cancer, guys. We may not always see it. There may not be always outward signs that a person is displaying, but it is real, and it can kill just like any other disease. We need to recognize how serious it is and spread awareness, just like with that Micah Miller case, instead of simply acting like mental illness doesn't exist, because that does no good. You never know what someone is going through on the inside. Don't assume that you do. With all this being said, make sure that you hug your loved ones. Make people feel good. Check on others. Make sure people are okay, because you just never know. I miss my dad so very much, but I do have peace knowing that that was what he wanted in that moment, and he's at peace now. Hindsight is 20/20. Looking back, I can tell you there might have been a few things we missed, but we had no way of knowing until it was too late. When someone dies in this manner, don't let them die in vain. Raise awareness about the importance of mental health instead of trying to point fingers and blame people or things as to why they did what they did. Because the truth is, we will never know why they did what they did until we see them again one day. If you have listened to me thus far, thank you. Thank you for hearing my story. My dad's story, I should say. Please, no negative comments. Just spread love, light, and awareness to how serious these things are. I love and appreciate all of you more than you know. And thank you again for listening.